You know what, just to be safe, then you did end up saving your ass later.
I was at a sleepover as a kid. I was a little worried because my mom had been oddly tired earlier that day. I went home early because I was worried. By the end of the night, I, of 14 at the time, had to call an ambulance for my mom, as she was having problems with her heart and I was the only one there with her. She was incapable of forming coherent sentences and would probably not have gotten the help she needed if I wasn't there. So, good thing I was.
Was delivering pizza in a sketchy block of town late at night. Huge apartment complex with multiple buildings. Walking up to the front door, I noticed a couple guys wearing dark clothing about 100 feet behind me walking in my direction. Delivery was on the second floor, and by the time I reached her door I heard the main door of the apartment complex open and close. She used a CC for the order and tipped in cash, so when I was putting the receipt into my bag, where I kept my cash, I actually pulled the rest of the cash out and stuffed it into my inner jacket pocket just to be safe, leaving just the change I had that night in the bag. Started to head down the stairs back out to my car, and two guys jumped out from behind the stairs, and the one had a gun pointed at me and told me to give them the money. I quickly handed them my bag filled with quarters and they took off towards the back entrance of the apartment complex. I never ran so fast in my life back to my car. I wanted to make sure I was as far away as possible before they realized they robbed me of $3.50 in quarters.
I dropped my high school girlfriend off, then for some reason I locked the passenger door. Not 10 minutes later I was stopped at a red light and some scummy looking dude tried to open up the door. I have no idea why I locked that door after she got out. I really didn't have a habit of that. No idea what would have happened if that guy got in my truck.
Driving along highway and get a bad feeling with drivers ahead of me tailgating back to back at 70 miles per hour. I switch lanes to be safe and get further clearance. Not 2 seconds later, one of the cars ahead slams on their brakes, looked like no fucking reason, and the cars in my previous lane slam into each other, and one car that was behind me slams into all of them full blast. Cars go flying into the air Hollywood style, flipping up nearly vertical before slamming back down. I'd probably be dead or have a lifelong disability if I hadn't moved. Avoid dumb drivers, kids, keep safe distances and buffers whenever possible.
My dad lost his glasses once. He was going to just use his old prescription but last minute decided to just go to the optometrist anyway in case something changed. Turns out he had a tear in his retina and was booked for surgery within 24 hours. It was bad enough they said he probably would have gone blind really soon had they not caught it when then did.
My stomach had some issues and my doctor sent me for a colonoscopy just to get things checked out. They found one polyp, no big deal, not related to the current problem, and told me to come back in 5 years just in case. I put a Google reminder and forgot about it. 5 years later, I went for the colonoscopy and they found a lot more and said I would have ended up with cancer in 5 to 20 years for sure had I not gone. Instead, they removed all polyps and now I'm regularly going to colonoscopies due to having a syndrome they identified. I'm far away from the age where you normally get a colonoscopy, so I would definitely have got cancer. When you are eligible or if it is recommended, get a colonoscopy.
Not my ass, but I was getting ready for school whilst Mum was vomiting in the bathroom. She said it was just a stomach bug and to just go to school but mentioned her arm hurt. Something didn't sit right, so I called the ambulance from downstairs. They arrived and took her into the ambulance. She then proceeded to have 3 cardiac arrests and needed defibrillated each time. A double bypass later and she was up and about within a month. Paramedics told me she would have died 5 minutes after I left if I hadn't called.
Snow chains at the bottom of the mountain. A bunch of cars passed me on a clear road on the way up with several warnings all the way up. I saw a local throwing on chains with no snow in the area. I decided to be safe and put them on. 30 minutes later I was in one of the worst snow driving conditions I've ever seen. Whiteout conditions in a snowstorm that eventually resulted in the complete shutdown of the roads. I passed car crash after car crash with just enough traction to feel somewhat comfortable moving 15 miles an hour. Anyone heading to Tahoe needs chains and chains that fit. Don't fuck around. I don't care if you have a 4-wheel drive. Driving through Tahoe and Mammoth during snowstorms is no joke. Literally sunny with no clouds to blinding white darkness in an hour.
Might sound ridiculous, but many years ago when I did my mandatory community service, was a thing in Germany as a counterpart to mandatory military service, there was a particular day in a pretty harsh winter. I usually went to work with my bike, as the streets were cleared of snow and ice anyway. At this day, I didn't take my helmet off because when I arrived at the place I worked I immediately started to shovel snow and didn't even walk inside first. My workplace was a huge and old 4-story hostel in the woods. The roof was packed with snow and there were massive icicles hanging from the gutters. When a coworker asked me why I decided to look like an idiot with my helmet on, I jokingly replied it was for serious security reasons. A few moments later, an icicle block fell down and hit me on the head and the shoulders. The impact was so brutal that it made me fall down on my knees. Shoulders were bruised, but my head was fine. I really don't know what could have happened if I didn't wear my stupid bicycle helmet for fun that morning. Serious injury for sure.
One day I was attempting to make carioca for the first time, a kind of Filipino fried mochi, and after I popped them in the oil, I settled in and watched them carefully. I never wear an apron whilst cooking, but for some reason I figured why not this time, and as soon as I stepped out of range of the fryer, they all exploded. Turns out, carioca can form an impermeable shell when fried, so pressure built up inside until they popped and sprayed hot oil all over the kitchen. Of course, I was safely away reaching for an apron and was completely dumbfounded. Made sure to punch some holes in all subsequent batches. Of course, once I cleaned the kitchen, I ate them and they were delicious. 10/10 highly recommend.
Was watching my toddler nephew, and he'd found a metal straw somewhere in the house and started playing with it. He was just tapping stuff and waving it around, but I just read a story on Reddit about a woman who got completely fucked up by a metal straw when she fell and it impaled her face, so I took the metal one from nephew and gave him a soft, squishy silicone one to play with instead. I'm not exaggerating when I say less than 5 minutes later, he fell like toddlers do and I saw the silicone straw all smushed into his cheek. I had to just sit for a while after that.
On a road trip with my siblings and I, Dad in Latin America, he lived there and we were visiting. On a highway at night, with clouds, no moon and no lights, this was a new highway that nobody likes taking now, as criminals often leave glass or spikes to puncture tires and rob you, or worse. We were driving and this guy was pulled over and waving for help. My dad stopped behind and the guy was scared and asked if we could light up his car while he changed a flat tire. He was terrified of being out there alone, and rightfully so. Dad goes to get out to help and my sister grabbed him and said she didn't think this felt right. Dad assured us it was fine and almost got out, but sister grabbed him again. Right then a car flew by the door right where he would have been. 4 guys jump out, one grabs the man, puts a gun to his head, and the others sprint to our car. There was a brief chase down the highway, but luckily their old Corolla didn't keep up with our Jeep, and they gave up after 2 to 3 minutes of driving 170 kilometers per hour. My sister saved my dad's life, and probably ours, by making him stay in the car that extra few seconds. Edit, the guy with a gun to his head lived and was okay given everything. After the chase, we had to turn around and continue on the way we were originally going, as there were no other routes to get back home, unless we backtracked 6 hours. After we passed the vehicle of the man, we saw he wasn't there anymore and we thought the worst. Luckily we ended up passing 4 National Guard vehicles about 2 kilometers later and saw that the man was with them talking to them.
Normally I'm pretty impressionable and cave to peer pressure, but this one time when I was younger I was hanging with my friends and a couple of older high school guys I'd only met that day. The girls were all fawning over them, but I could tell they were idiots. When they all wanted to go for a drive with the guys, I thought, nah, I don't trust these guys and I think it's best I just call my parents and go home. I got a call the next morning from one of the girls who was passenger. One of the high school boys was driving. They had a serious crash and one of the girls wasn't wearing her seatbelt and hit her head on the dash and was in a coma for 6 months. She was in intensive care and rehabilitation for years. Still can't believe of all the days I decided not to go with the flow, it probably saved my life. Terribly sad about my friend. We were really close, but she never came right and her personality changed. I still wonder how successful she might have been and if we'd still be friends if that hadn't happened to her. Really sad.
As a teenager, a friend of mine managed to lift a set of keys to a new car on a dealership lot. We were all super excited to go there that night and take that new car for a spin. At the last moment I thought of how disappointed my mom would be, and backed out. That night, during the joyride, they got into a high-speed chase with a couple of cop cars, took an intersection at 85 miles per hour against traffic, and were spun into a brick wall after an initial collision with a garbage truck. The driver was killed, 17, and my 2 other friends suffered critical injuries and were hospitalized for weeks. No doubt in my mind that I would have been injured, or killed, as well.
Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed my video, do like and subscribe and check out my other videos. If you want, you can support me on Patreon from below, where I post wholesome content every day to raise funds for my dad's ongoing tumor treatment. Have an absolutely fantastic day, my friend.